December 15, 1944. The Battle of the Bulge raged across the Ardennes forest, and the world held its breath as German forces launched their final desperate gamble in the West. In cities across the Reich, propaganda ministers assured citizens that new weapons and unwavering determination would secure victory. But in a captured American supply depot outside Liège, Belgium, two Wehrmacht officers stood frozen in the cavernous entrance of a warehouse that stretched beyond the limits of their vision, and felt their entire understanding of the war collapse around them. Hauptmann Klaus Richter had spent 4 years as a quartermaster for the Wehrmacht, managing supplies with the precision that had once made German logistics the envy of Europe. At 32 years old, he had coordinated the movement of rations, ammunition, and equipment across 3 fronts. He understood supply chains, production capacities, and the mathematics of modern warfare, or so he had believed. Now, standing in the December cold with his hands bound, staring into a warehouse that seemed to have no end, he felt every certainty he had ever held begin to crumble. Beside him, Lieutenant Werner Vogel, 26 years old and captured alongside Klaus during the chaotic first days of the German offensive, whispered in disbelief, "This cannot be real. This is some kind of trick, some propaganda display they've constructed to demoralize us." But it was real. The American sergeant escorting them, a stocky man from Chicago named Davis, seemed almost bored as he gestured toward the endless rows of stacked supplies. "This here's just one of 17 depots in this sector," he said, his tone suggesting he was describing something as mundane as a grocery store. "We got more coming in tomorrow. Always more coming in." Klaus felt his professional mind engaging automatically, counting, calculating, estimating. Rows of wooden crates stamped with U.S. Army supply stretched into the distance, stacked 20 feet high in some places. The warehouse itself must have been 300 meters long, maybe more, and this was one of 17. His hands began to shake, not from the cold, but from the implications of what he was seeing. Werner noticed his trembling. "Klaus? Are you all right?" How could he explain? How could he put into words what his quartermaster's training was telling him? That this single warehouse contained more supplies than entire German armies received in months. That the casual abundance on display here represented an industrial capacity beyond anything the Reich could match. That if this was real, if this was just one depot among many, then everything he had been told about American weakness and German superiority was a lie. "Werner," Klaus said quietly, his voice barely audible above the sound of trucks moving outside, "I think we have lost this war. And I think we lost it before it ever began." Klaus Richter had never imagined himself as a soldier. Born in Munich in 1912, he had grown up in his father's accounting firm, learning to see the world through numbers and balances. While other boys played at war, Klaus studied mathematics and developed a love for the elegant logic of well-organized systems. When conscription came in 1939, the Wehrmacht quickly recognized his talents and assigned him to quartermaster duties rather than combat infantry. He had approached military logistics with the same precision he had once applied to his father's ledgers. Every rifle needed ammunition. Every soldier needed rations. Every vehicle required fuel and maintenance. War, Klaus had learned, was ultimately a problem of mathematics. The side that could calculate better, supply faster, and manage resources more efficiently would prevail. He had believed Germany excelled at this. He had believed their legendary efficiency gave them an insurmountable advantage. Werner Vogel had come to logistics through a different path. The bleak, youngest son of a schoolteacher in Hamburg, he had studied engineering at university before the war interrupted his education. At 18, he had been swept up in the enthusiasm of 1940 when victory seemed inevitable and the Reich appeared unstoppable. He had joined the Quartermaster Corps, believing he was serving the machinery of an invincible military force. The two men had met in France in 1943, assigned to the same supply division as Allied bombing began to disrupt German logistics networks. Klaus, by then a captain, had recognized Werner's sharp mind and attention to detail. They had worked together to keep supplies flowing despite increasing difficulties, developing a professional respect that grew into genuine friendship. Both men had noticed the changes over the past year. Supplies arriving later, in smaller quantities. Requests denied. Rations reduced. equipment that broke down and could not be replaced. Klaus had written reports documenting the deterioration, always careful to frame it as temporary difficulties rather than systemic failure. Werner had grown quieter, his youthful enthusiasm fading as the reality of their situation became harder to ignore. They had been captured during the opening hours of the Ardennes offensive, separated from their unit when American forces counterattacked faster than intelligence had predicted. Neither man had fired a weapon. They had simply found themselves surrounded by American soldiers who seemed almost apologetic about taking them prisoner, offering cigarettes and chocolate as if capturing enemy officers was merely an inconvenience rather than a triumph. Now, standing in this impossible warehouse, Klaus understood that their capture might have saved them from something worse than death. It had saved them from continuing to serve a cause that was already lost, from participating in a lie that was sending hundreds of thousands of men to pointless deaths. But this knowledge brought no comfort. Only a hollow feeling in his chest and a question that would haunt him for the rest of his life. How long had the truth been visible to anyone willing to see it? The prisoner of war compound outside Liège was nothing like Klaus had expected. He had heard stories of brutal American camps, of prisoners starved and beaten, of conditions designed to break the spirit of captured German soldiers. The propaganda had been specific and vivid. Yet the reality was so different that for the first 3 days, he suspected it was all an elaborate deception. The barracks were heated. Not luxuriously, but adequately enough that men did not wake shivering in the night. The bunks had mattresses, thin but serviceable, and each prisoner received 2 wool blankets. The latrine facilities, while basic, were clean and functional. Most unsettling of all were the meals. 3 times daily, American guards distributed rations that exceeded what many German frontline soldiers had received in months. White bread, canned meat, powdered eggs, coffee, real coffee, not the ersatz mixture of roasted grains that had become standard in Germany. Werner sat on his bunk on their 3rd evening in captivity, holding a chocolate bar that an American guard had casually tossed to him. He turned it over in his hands as if it were an artifact from another civilization. "Klaus," he said softly, "when was the last time you saw chocolate in a German supply depot?" Klaus did not answer immediately. He was writing in a small notebook that the Americans had allowed him to keep, documenting observations with the same meticulous attention to detail that had defined his career. But Werner's question struck at something he had been trying to avoid thinking about. Chocolate had disappeared from German military supplies in 1942. By 1943, even coffee had become a luxury reserved for officers. Yet here, in an enemy prison camp, such items were distributed with thoughtless abundance. "They are trying to demoralize us," Klaus finally said, though his voice lacked conviction, "showing us plenty to make us doubt our cause." Werner unwrapped the chocolate and broke off a piece, the snap of it unnaturally loud in the quiet barracks. "Or maybe," he said slowly, "this is just normal for them. Maybe this is not special treatment. Maybe this is simply how they supply even their prisoners." The thought was more disturbing than any propaganda story about brutal camps. If this was normal, if this level of abundance was standard even for enemy captives, then what did that say about American productive capacity? Klaus returned to his notebook, but his hand had stopped writing. Instead, he stared at the numbers he had been recording: ration weights, distribution frequencies. The mathematical reality was inescapable for anyone trained to see it. Outside their barracks, they could hear American soldiers laughing, radios playing music, trucks moving supplies through the compound, the sounds of an army that did not know scarcity, that had never learned to ration, to conserve, to make do with less. Klaus closed his notebook and lay back on his bunk, staring at the ceiling. For the first time since his capture, he felt something more frightening than fear. He felt the cold certainty of mathematical truth. On their 8th day in captivity, Klaus and Werner were summoned to the camp commandant's office. Major William Bradford, a career logistics officer from Pennsylvania, sat behind his desk examining their service records with interest. He was a heavy-set man in his 40s with wire-rimmed glasses and the demeanor of a university professor rather than a military commander. "Gentlemen," he said in passable German, "I understand you both served in quartermaster operations. I have a proposal that may interest you." He switched to English, gesturing to a younger officer who would translate. "We need help cataloging supplies at the main depot. German prisoners who cooperate and work receive better accommodations and additional privileges. You would be supervised, of course, but your expertise would be valuable. Klaus and Werner exchanged glances. The offer seemed strange, almost suspicious. Why would the Americans want enemy quartermasters examining their supply operations? Werner voiced the question in careful English. "Why do you trust us with this information?" Major Bradford smiled, a weary expression that suggested he had heard this question before. "Lieutenant, the war is nearly over. Everyone knows it except perhaps Berlin. What you will see at the depot is no secret. Hell, we publish production numbers in our newspapers for anyone to read. We want you to understand what you are up against. Perhaps when you return home, you will help others understand as well." 2 hours later, Klaus and Werner stood at the entrance to Supply Depot 7, the same warehouse they had glimpsed on the day of their capture. But now, they were being given a complete tour, accompanied by Captain Robert Chen, a Chinese-American supply officer who seemed genuinely enthusiastic about logistics systems. "We receive shipments 3 times weekly," Chen explained as they walked down the central aisle. "Liberty ships from New York, Boston, Philadelphia. Each ship carries approximately 10,000 tons of cargo. This depot processes supplies for the 1st and 9th Armies, roughly 400,000 men." Klaus stopped walking. He pulled out his notebook, needing to write the numbers to make them real. 10,000 tons per ship, 3 times weekly? Per depot, Chen corrected. There are 17 depots in this sector alone. Multiply that across the entire European theater. He paused, watching Klaus's face. "You are starting to understand, yes?" Werner had walked ahead, staring up at stacks of artillery shells that rose like towers toward the warehouse ceiling. "How many shells in each crate?" he asked quietly. "Depends on the caliber," Chen replied. "Those are 75 mm, 24 rounds per crate. We have approximately 8,000 crates in this section. Another 12,000 in Warehouse 3. Klaus's pencil moved across the page, calculating automatically. Nearly 500,000 artillery shells in just 2 warehouses. He thought of the ammunition shortages that had plagued German artillery units, the careful rationing of every shell, the reports he had written pleading for increased allocations. His hand began to shake again. The true horror revealed itself not in weapons or ammunition, but in the mundane luxuries that surrounded them everywhere. On their 3rd day working at the depot, Klaus watched an American sergeant dump an entire pot of coffee into a sink because it had grown cold. The man whistled while he did it, already preparing a fresh pot, completely unaware that he had just discarded what would have been a week's ration for a German officer. Werner noticed Klaus staring. "I saw a soldier throw away half a sandwich yesterday," he whispered in German. "White bread, real meat, cheese." He said he was not hungry anymore. They were sitting in the depot's mess hall during their lunch break, eating better food than most German civilians had seen in years. Around them, American soldiers complained about the quality of the meat, joked about the powdered eggs, traded cigarettes as casually as if they were worthless. One young private grumbled that the coffee was not strong enough. Klaus wanted to grab him, to shake him, to make him understand that people were dying for what he was carelessly consuming. Captain Chen joined them at their table, carrying a tray loaded with food. "You are not eating much," he observed, noting their barely touched plates. "The food is not good?" "The food is fine," Klaus said carefully. "It is just difficult to adjust." Chen nodded with understanding. "Culture shock. My parents came from China. They still cannot get used to American abundance. My mother saves everything, reuses everything, old habits from scarcity." He took a bite of his sandwich, then continued. "But this is not abundance, really. This is just normal. This is how we have always lived." That statement haunted Klaus for the rest of the day. Not abundance, but normal. He thought of his mother in Munich, rationing every potato, saving cooking fat like precious oil. He thought of his sister's children, thin and pale, excited when they received an orange for Christmas. Normal for them was deprivation. Normal for Americans was waste. In the afternoon, they cataloged medical supplies. Warehouse after warehouse filled with bandages, morphine, sulfa drugs, surgical instruments. Klaus had seen German field hospitals running out of basic supplies, surgeons operating without anesthesia, wounds going untreated because there were no bandages. Here, supplies were stacked to the ceiling, more arriving daily. "We throw away more than you produce," Werner said suddenly, his voice hollow. They were alone in an aisle, surrounded by crates of penicillin. "That is the truth, is it not? The waste from one American depot exceeds the total output of German medical supply production." Klaus did not answer, because there was no answer that would not confirm what they both already knew. Instead, he continued counting, recording numbers that were becoming less like data and more like evidence at a trial. Evidence of a crime, perhaps, or evidence of a delusion. He was no longer certain which Germany was guilty of, but he knew the numbers did not lie. They never did. The first letters from home arrived in early January, 1945. The Red Cross had established mail service for prisoners of war, though messages were heavily censored and often took weeks to arrive. Klaus received 3 letters at once, all from his mother in Munich. He sat on his bunk in the barracks, holding them with trembling hands, afraid of what they might contain. The first letter, dated November, was still relatively hopeful. His mother wrote about rationing difficulties and air raid sirens, but her tone remained resilient. "We manage," she wrote. "Germans have always been strong in adversity. Your father sends his love. He is proud of your service." The second letter, from December, was different. The handwriting was shakier, the sentences shorter. "Your sister Greta's apartment was destroyed in a bombing raid. She and the children are living with us now. 5 people in 3 rooms. The children cry from hunger. There is no coal for heating. We burn furniture to stay warm, but we believe in final victory. We must believe." The third letter arrived just before Christmas. Klaus almost could not read it. His mother's writing had deteriorated further, the words cramped and desperate. "Your father died last week. Heart failure," the doctor said. "But I know it was hunger and cold and despair. We have not had real food in months. The children are so thin. Greta talks about things that make no sense anymore. She says she sees your father at night, telling her to be strong. Klaus, I do not know how much longer we can endure. Please, if you can, come home. We need you." Klaus folded the letter carefully and placed it back in its envelope. His hands were steady now, steady with a rage that had nowhere to go. Around him in the barracks, other German prisoners read their own letters, their faces reflecting similar devastation. One man wept silently. Another stared at the wall with empty eyes. Werner approached quietly, holding a single letter. "My brother Friedrich," he said. "Still fighting on the Eastern Front. He writes that they have no winter equipment, no adequate ammunition, no fuel for vehicles. But he says morale remains high. He says they will win because German will is stronger than Russian or American material superiority." Werner's voice was bitter. He actually wrote that. Will stronger than material superiority. That evening, Klaus sat in the mess hall eating roast beef and mashed potatoes while his mother and sister burned furniture to survive. He drank coffee, real coffee, while his father's body lay in frozen ground because there was no fuel to heat the cemetery chapel. Around him, American soldiers complained about the quality of the gravy, about wanting steak instead of roast beef, about being bored. He thought about his notebook, about all the numbers he had recorded, about warehouses full of food while German children starved, about abundance and waste while his family died. The mathematics had become personal now, and the equation was unbearable. Klaus began documenting everything with obsessive precision. What had started as professional habit became something darker, more urgent. Every night after work at the depot, he retreated to his bunk and filled page after page of his notebook with figures, calculations, comparisons. Werner watched this ritual with growing concern. "What are you doing?" Werner asked one evening, sitting beside Klaus as he worked by the dim barracks light. "Why are you recording all of this?" Klaus did not look up from his calculations. "Because someone needs to know the truth. Because when this war ends, Germany will need to understand why we lost. Not propaganda, not excuses about betrayal or weakness, the mathematical truth." He showed Werner the numbers: American steel production versus German steel production, oil refining capacity, aircraft manufacturing rates, agricultural output, food calories per capita. Every metric told the same story, painted the same devastating picture. Germany had never had a chance. The war had been decided not on battlefields but in factories, farms, and oil fields years before the first shot was fired. "Look at this," Klaus said, his finger stabbing at a page of calculations. The United States produced more military equipment in 1943 alone than Germany produced in the entire war. 1 year versus 6 years. And that is just America, not counting Britain or the Soviet Union. Werner studied the numbers, his face growing pale. These figures, if they are accurate, mean that every soldier who died after 1942 died for nothing. Every city bombed, every family destroyed. All of it was pointless because the outcome was already determined. Not pointless, Klaus corrected quietly. Worse than pointless, criminal. Because the leaders knew, Werner. They had to know. They had access to intelligence, to production reports, to economic analysis. They knew we could not win, and they sent millions to die anyway. The accusation hung in the air between them, dangerous and seditious. Even in an American prison camp, old habits of caution remained. But Klaus was beyond caring about such things now. His father was dead, his family was starving, and he was sitting in a heated barracks, well-fed, surrounded by evidence of the lies that had killed them. Captain Chen found Klaus in the depot library the next day, surrounded by American newspapers and military production reports. The captain had given him access to unclassified documents, materials that were public knowledge in America, but would have been state secrets in Germany. "You are trying to understand," Chen observed, sitting down across from him. "That is good. Understanding is the first step toward healing." "I am not trying to heal," Klaus said flatly. "I am trying to document. I am creating a ledger of lies, Captain. Every number I record is proof that we were deceived, that our leaders sacrificed us for a cause they knew was hopeless." Chen was quiet for a moment. "And what will you do with this ledger, Klaus?" "I do not know yet," Klaus admitted. "But someone must remember. Someone must be able to prove what really happened here." Captain Chen became an unexpected confidant. Unlike other American officers who maintained professional distance from prisoners, Chen seemed genuinely interested in Klaus and Werner's perspectives. He would sit with them during breaks, asking questions about German logistics, sharing information about American supply systems, treating them less like enemies and more like colleagues discussing a shared profession. "You seem surprised by our production capacity," Chen said one afternoon as they inventoried engine parts. "But these numbers are not secret. We publish them in newspapers, in congressional reports. Any German intelligence officer could have accessed this information before the war." Klaus looked up from his counting. "Then why did no one tell us? Why did our leaders claim that America was weak, industrially backward, incapable of matching German efficiency?" Chen shrugged. "Perhaps they believed their own propaganda. Perhaps they knew but thought willpower could overcome material reality. Or perhaps they simply did not care because the alternative was admitting they had led Germany into an unwinnable war." Werner, who had been quietly listening, spoke up. "You make it sound so simple, as if it was obvious from the beginning." "It was obvious," Chen replied gently. "To anyone willing to look at the numbers honestly. America had more people, more resources, more industrial capacity, and no bombers destroying our factories. The mathematics were always against you. I am sorry, but it is true." Over the following weeks, these conversations became a regular occurrence. Chen would share production statistics, explain American logistics doctrine, describe the industrial mobilization that had transformed the United States into what he called the arsenal of democracy. He did this without gloating, without cruelty, simply presenting facts as one professional to another. "In 1943, Chen explained one day, we produced 300,000 aircraft. How many did Germany produce?" Klaus knew the answer. He had seen the reports. "Approximately 25,000. 12 times more," Chen said. "And that gap grew wider, every year. You could not bomb our factories because they were 3,000 miles away across an ocean, but we could bomb yours every day. The equation was impossible, Klaus. Courage cannot defeat mathematics." These conversations forced Klaus to confront uncomfortable questions about duty and loyalty. Was it betrayal to acknowledge these truths? Was it treason to admit that Germany had been wrong, that the cause he had served was not just defeated, but had been doomed from the start? Or was the real betrayal the lies that had sent millions to die for an impossible dream? One evening, as they walked back to the barracks, Werner voiced what both men had been thinking. "Chen is right, you know. It was obvious. We just did not want to see it. Or maybe we saw it but were too afraid to admit what it meant." Klaus nodded slowly. "The most dangerous lies are the ones we tell ourselves. We wanted to believe in German superiority, in the invincibility of our cause. So we ignored the numbers that contradicted what we wanted to be true." "And now?" Werner asked. "Now we know better," Klaus said simply. "The question is what we do with that knowledge." By late February, Klaus's notebook had become something more than simple documentation. It was a comprehensive analysis of why Germany had lost the war, supported by irrefutable mathematical evidence. He had compiled production statistics, resource comparisons, logistical capacity assessments, and economic analyses. Every page was a damning indictment of the illusions that had led his country to ruin. Werner sat beside him one evening as Klaus made his final calculations, the culmination of 2 months of obsessive work. "I have it now," Klaus said quietly. "The complete picture. Do you want to see?" Werner nodded, and Klaus opened to a summary page where he had distilled everything into stark comparisons. American oil production exceeded German oil production by a ratio of 10 to 1, steel production by 8 to 1, agricultural output by 15 to 1. The United States had entered the war with an economy 5 times larger than Germany's and had mobilized that economy with ruthless efficiency. "But here is the most important number," Klaus said, pointing to a figure at the bottom of the page. "Total military production from 1939 to 1945. America produced approximately $300 billion worth of military equipment. Germany produced approximately $75 billion, 4 to 1. The Soviet Union adds another $200 billion, Britain another $120 billion. We were fighting enemies who collectively outproduced us by more than 6 to 1. Werner stared at the numbers. 6 to 1. How do you win a war against those odds? "You do not," Klaus said simply. "You cannot. No amount of courage, discipline, or tactical brilliance can overcome such material disadvantage. This is why we lost. Not because of betrayal or weakness or any other excuse they will invent. We lost because the mathematics made victory impossible." The weight of this knowledge pressed down on both men. They now understood something that most Germans, including soldiers still fighting, did not. The war had been decided years ago. Every battle since had been pointless. Every death since had been for nothing except delaying the inevitable. "What do we do with this?" Werner asked. "We cannot send it home. The censors would never allow it. Even if we could, would anyone believe us? Or would they call us traitors, corrupted by enemy propaganda?" Klaus closed his notebook carefully. "I do not know. But Captain Chen was right about one thing. Understanding is necessary for healing. Germany will need to understand why this happened, how we were deceived, what the reality actually was. Otherwise, we will invent comfortable lies to explain our defeat, and those lies will poison our future just as surely as the lies that brought us to war poisoned our past. So we wait," Werner said. "We document, we understand, and we wait for the right moment to share what we have learned." "We wait," Klaus agreed, "but we also prepare, because someone will need to help Germany face these truths. Someone will need to show them the numbers that make denial impossible." Outside, the sounds of American supply trucks continued through the night, endless and abundant, the mechanical heartbeat of an industrial civilization that could not be defeated. March brought warmer weather and an intensification of supply movements that made the winter operations seem modest by comparison. Klaus and Werner watched as the depot transformed into a hurricane of activity, preparing for what the Americans called the final push into Germany. What they witnessed during those weeks exceeded anything they had seen before. Trains arrived every 6 hours, each one stretching for what seemed like miles. Klaus counted 147 cars on a single train, every car loaded with supplies. Trucks formed convoys that took 30 minutes to pass through the depot gates. Liberty ships arrived at the Belgian port and were unloaded in shifts that continued around the clock. The scale was incomprehensible. "I need you to see something," Captain Chen said one morning, leading them to an overlook where they could observe the entire depot complex. From this vantage point, the true magnitude became visible. 17 warehouses, each the size of a small village. Fuel tank farms that held millions of gallons. Motor pools with thousands of vehicles waiting for deployment. Rail yards where dozens of trains sat loading and unloading simultaneously. "This is one depot," Chen reminded them, "one among hundreds across Europe. And this same scene is being replicated in the Pacific Theater, in Africa, in every place American forces operate. The supply chain never stops. It never even slows down." Werner pulled out a small notepad he had begun carrying, mimicking Klaus's documentation habit. "How many people does it take to operate this depot?" "Approximately 3,000 soldiers and civilian workers," Chen replied. "But that does not count the thousands more involved in the chain behind us. The factory workers in Detroit and Pittsburgh, the farmers growing food, the shipyard workers building Liberty ships, the railroad men moving everything across America. For every soldier fighting, there are perhaps 50 people supporting him. That is how modern war works." Klaus thought about German logistics, about the chronic understaffing, the overworked quartermasters trying to do with dozens what Americans did with thousands. He thought about the horses Germany still relied upon for transportation because fuel was scarce. He had seen reports that the Wehrmacht was using more horses in 1944 than in 1940. Horses, while America moved supplies with trucks that arrived by the thousands from factories that never stopped producing. That afternoon, they observed the arrival of a tank transporter convoy. 50 massive trucks, each carrying a Sherman tank. Werner did the calculation aloud. 50 tanks in one convoy. I remember reading a German report celebrating the production of 30 tanks in a single month from one factory. They arrive here 50 at a time, and this is just one delivery among many. As they watched the tanks being unloaded with mechanical efficiency, Klaus understood something profound. They were not just witnessing superior logistics or better supply management, they were witnessing a fundamentally different kind of civilization. One built on abundance, on mass production, on the assumption that there would always be more. Germany had fought a 19th century war with early 20th century tactics. America was waging a war that belonged to a future Germany could not yet imagine. Sleep became difficult for Klaus. He would lie awake in the barracks, listening to the sounds of supply operations, continuing through the night, thinking about soldiers dying on the western and eastern fronts who still believed victory was possible. Men throwing their lives away for a cause that mathematics had already condemned. The knowledge felt like a physical weight pressing down on his chest. Werner was suffering too. He had received another letter from his brother Friedrich, still fighting in the east. The letter was full of desperate optimism, talk of new weapons being developed, of strategic retreats that would lure the enemy into traps, of the unbreakable German spirit that would prevail against material odds. Reading it was torture because Werner now understood exactly how delusional every word was. "He is going to die believing in victory," Werner said one night, his voice breaking. "My brother is going to die for a lie, and I cannot even tell him the truth because any letter I write will be censored. Even if I could tell him, would he believe me? Or would he think I had been brainwashed by enemy propaganda?" Klaus had no answer. He thought about his own family, his mother and sister starving in Munich while he lived in relative comfort. The guilt was corrosive. He was safe, well-fed, alive, while those he loved suffered. And worst of all, he now understood that their suffering was pointless, that Germany's continued resistance only prolonged the agony without changing the inevitable outcome. Major Bradford summoned them to his office in early April. He looked tired, older than his years. "Gentlemen, I want you to understand something. We are not keeping you here to punish you. We are keeping you here because we hope you will learn something valuable, something Germany will need to know when this is over." "What is that, sir?" Klaus asked. "That there is no shame in acknowledging reality," Bradford replied. "That accepting truth, even painful truth, is not weakness, but wisdom. Germany fought bravely. No one can deny that. But bravery alone cannot overcome fundamental disadvantages in resources and production. Understanding this does not dishonor your service or your country. It honors the truth." After they left his office, Klaus and Werner walked through the depot in silence. They passed American soldiers who joked and laughed, who seemed almost bored by the routine of their work, who had no idea that their casual efficiency was overwhelming an entire nation's desperate efforts. "We are like ghosts," Werner said suddenly. "We know how the story ends, but we are powerless to change it. We can only watch and wait and carry this knowledge that no one wants to hear." Klaus understood exactly what he meant. They had become witnesses to something terrible and true. They had seen behind the curtain of propaganda and illusion to the mathematical reality beneath. And that knowledge had isolated them from everyone they loved, everyone who still lived within the comfortable lies that made continued resistance seem noble rather than tragic. The burden of understanding, Klaus realized, was perhaps the heaviest burden of all. The moral question haunted Klaus with increasing intensity. Every night, as he lay in his bunk, the same thought circled through his mind like a vulture. If he knew the war was lost, if he had mathematical proof that continued resistance only meant more pointless deaths, did he have a responsibility to make that information known? And if so, how could he possibly do that without being branded a traitor? "We could write to German commanders," Werner suggested one evening during one of their increasingly desperate conversations. "Anonymous letters with production statistics, economic analysis. Maybe if enough officers understood the true situation, they would seek terms." Klaus shook his head. "Any letter we send will be read by censors first. The Americans would never allow it because it could be seen as espionage. And even if such a letter somehow reached German commanders, they would dismiss it as enemy propaganda. We have no credibility. We are prisoners who might have been coerced or corrupted." "Then we do nothing?" Werner's voice was anguished. "We sit here in comfort while men die for a lie we could expose? What would you have us do?" Klaus shot back, his own frustration boiling over. "Stand up and shout the truth? Write seditious pamphlets? Stage a protest? We are prisoners, Werner. We have no power, no platform, no way to reach anyone who matters." But the argument felt hollow even as he made it. Silence might be practical, might be the only realistic option available to them. But did that make it right? Klaus thought about a calculation he had done the previous week. Based on casualty rates and the mathematical impossibility of German victory, he estimated that every month the war continued cost approximately 200,000 unnecessary deaths. 200,000 lives that could be saved if Germany would simply accept what the numbers had already determined. Captain Chen found Klaus in the depot library 2 days later, staring blankly at production reports without really seeing them. "You are struggling with something," Chen observed. "I can see it in your face." Klaus looked up, exhausted. "Captain, if you knew that telling the truth could save lives, but would also mark you as a traitor to your country, what would you do?" Chen sat down slowly. "That is the hardest question a soldier can face. Loyalty to country versus loyalty to truth. Loyalty to the cause versus loyalty to humanity." He was quiet for a moment. "I think the answer depends on what you believe your country truly is. Is Germany the regime that led you into this war? Or is Germany the people who are suffering and dying because of that regime's decisions?" The question struck Klaus like a physical blow. He had been thinking about loyalty to Germany as loyalty to its government, its military, its official institutions. But what about loyalty to Germans, to the actual human beings, in whose lives were being destroyed? Was allowing them to continue dying for a lost cause somehow more honorable than telling them the truth? "I do not know what to do," Klaus admitted quietly. "None of us do," Chen replied. "We can only do our best with the knowledge we have." Werner's brother Friedrich wrote one final letter that arrived on April 20th, 1945. Werner read it silently first, his face draining of color, then handed it to Klaus without a word. The letter was dated March 28th, written from somewhere near Berlin. "Dear Werner," it began. "If you are reading this, it means the field post still functions despite everything. We have been ordered to defend the capital. The situation is difficult, I will not lie. But our resolve has never been stronger. The Führer has promised new weapons that will turn the tide. We have received reports of wonder weapons being prepared, of secret divisions being held in reserve for the final counterattack. I know you may hear different things from American propaganda, but you must not believe their lies. Germany cannot lose because we will not allow it. Our will is our greatest weapon." The letter continued for another page, full of the same desperate faith, the same refusal to acknowledge reality. Friedrich wrote about his comrades, young men and boys now, some only 16 years old, all convinced they were fighting for Germany's survival. He wrote about how they sang patriotic songs in their bunkers, how they encouraged each other with stories of past German victories against impossible odds. "I know you are in enemy hands," the letter concluded. "I pray they treat you well, though I fear what they may tell you to break your spirit. Stay strong, brother. Believe in Germany. Believe in final victory. When we win, and we will win, I will come find you and bring you home. Your brother always, Friedrich." Werner's hands shook as Klaus returned the letter. "He wrote this 3 weeks ago. Berlin is probably surrounded by now. He is either dead or will be dead soon, and he died believing in lies, Klaus. Lies we could have exposed. We could not have reached him," Klaus said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Could we not?" Werner's eyes were red. "What if we had tried? What if we had found some way to get information out, to break through the censorship, to tell the truth? Would it have mattered? Could we have saved him?" Klaus thought about all the letters he had not written, all the warnings he had not attempted to send. He thought about his own calculations, about how every week of continued resistance meant more deaths like Friedrich's. Young men dying in ruins, convinced their sacrifice had meaning, never knowing that the cause was already lost. "I wrote him back 3 times, Werner continued. 3 letters trying to hint at what we know without saying it directly, trying to make him understand without alerting the censors. Every letter came back marked, content prohibited. I could not reach him, Klaus. My own brother, and I could not reach him." The distance between those who knew and those who believed had become unbridgeable. Truth and faith existed in separate worlds now, and the gap between them was filled with the corpses of men like Friedrich, who died defending illusions. Outside, the supply trains continued to arrive, indifferent to individual tragedies, the mechanical rhythm of an ending that had been written in numbers long ago. May 8, 1945. Victory in Europe Day arrived with a strange absence of celebration in the prisoner barracks. While American soldiers outside cheered and fired weapons into the air, while church bells rang across Belgium and France, the German prisoners sat in stunned silence. The war was over. Germany had surrendered unconditionally. Everything was finished. Klaus sat on his bunk holding his notebook, the leather cover worn from months of constant handling. Inside were hundreds of pages documenting why this moment had been inevitable, why the outcome had been determined years before. The knowledge felt useless now, a ledger of predictions that had come true too late to matter. Werner had not spoken since receiving confirmation of Berlin's fall 3 days earlier. There had been no word about his brother Friedrich. The silence was answer enough. Klaus thought about his own family, uncertain whether his mother and sister had survived the final battle for Germany. Communication with civilians inside Germany had ceased weeks ago. Major Bradford assembled all German prisoners that afternoon. His face was serious, lacking the triumph that might have been expected on such a day. "Gentlemen," he said through a translator, "the war in Europe is over. You will be repatriated to Germany in the coming months, though the process will take time. Germany as you knew it no longer exists. The country is divided into occupation zones. Many cities are in ruins. I tell you this not to cause pain, but so you understand what you will be returning to." That evening, Captain Chen found Klaus and Werner sitting outside the barracks, staring at nothing. He sat down beside them without asking permission. "You knew," he said quietly. "You both knew this was coming. You saw the numbers. Did that make it easier?" "No," Klaus said. "Knowing made it worse. We watched it happen, knowing it was inevitable, powerless to stop it, or even to warn anyone. We became witnesses to a catastrophe we could not prevent." Chen nodded slowly. "But you documented it. You understood it. That knowledge may seem useless now, but Germany will need people who understand what actually happened, who can explain the truth without comforting lies." Werner finally spoke, his voice hoarse. "What good is truth to the dead? What good is understanding to my brother, to Klaus's father, to all the men who died in the last year believing they were defending something worth dying for? Truth does not help the dead, Chen agreed. It helps the living. It helps those who must rebuild. It helps prevent the same mistakes from being repeated. He stood up, preparing to leave. You are not just prisoners or soldiers anymore. You are witnesses. What you choose to do with that testimony will matter more than you know. After Chen left, Klaus opened his notebook again, looking at months of careful documentation. Werner watched him. What will you do with it? I do not know yet, Klaus admitted. But I will not let this knowledge die. Someone must remember. Someone must be able to prove what really happened here. Repatriation began in July 1945. German prisoners were processed in waves, sorted by region of origin, waiting for transportation to occupation zones that corresponded to their homes. Klaus learned that Munich was in the American zone. Werner's Hamburg would be under British control. They would likely never see each other again after leaving Belgium. The night before their scheduled departure, they sat in the barracks one final time, discussing what they would do with the knowledge they carried. Klaus's notebook had grown to 3 volumes now, meticulously documenting not just American production capacity, but also the systematic way Germany had deceived itself about its prospects for victory. We could publish it, Werner suggested. Write a book, an analysis of why Germany lost, show the numbers to the world. Klaus shook his head. Who would publish it? Who would believe us? We are defeated enemy soldiers. Anything we say will be dismissed as excuse-making or collaboration with the victors. The German people will want to hear about betrayal, about fighting to the bitter end with honor. They will not want mathematical proofs that their sacrifice was pointless. Then what? Werner asked. We carry this knowledge in silence? We let Germany invent whatever comfortable lies help them sleep at night? No, Klaus said firmly. We wait. We rebuild our lives. We find positions where we can influence how Germany understands its past. Eventually, when enough time has passed, when people are ready to hear truth instead of comforting mythology, we make this documentation available to historians, to educators, to anyone willing to look at the evidence honestly. Major Bradford called them to his office their final morning at the depot. He handed each of them an official document, letters of reference describing their work and conduct during captivity. These may help you find employment, he explained. You both have valuable skills. Germany will need competent administrators during reconstruction. Then he did something unexpected. He handed Klaus a package wrapped in brown paper. Captain Chen asked me to give you this. He said you would understand what to do with it. Inside were 3 bound volumes of American production statistics from 1939 through 1945, official government documents compiled for post-war analysis. A note from Chen was tucked inside, for your ledger. So you have evidence from both sides. Use it wisely when the time is right. The journey back to Germany took 2 weeks, traveling through a landscape of devastation that exceeded anything Klaus had imagined. Cities reduced to rubble. Refugees clogging roads. Displaced persons wandering without destination. This was the Germany that resulted from 6 years of war against impossible odds, from refusing to acknowledge mathematical reality until forced to by total defeat. Werner and Klaus parted ways at a distribution center near Frankfurt. They shook hands, 2 quartermasters who had calculated the cost of illusion and found it unbearable. When Germany is ready to hear the truth, Werner said, we will make sure they have the numbers to support it. When they are ready, Klaus agreed. Until then, we rebuild and we remember. 20 years passed before Klaus Richter's documentation saw public light. It was 1965, and West Germany had rebuilt itself into an economic power, a democracy integrated into Western Europe. The generation that had fought the war was aging, and a new generation was asking difficult questions about how Germany had descended into catastrophism and self-destruction. Klaus had found work with the new German Ministry of Economics, using his quartermaster skills to help coordinate the logistics of reconstruction. He had married, raised 2 children, built a quiet, respectable life. But he had never forgotten the notebooks, the careful documentation of truth that his country had not been ready to hear. Werner had become a professor of industrial economics at the University of Hamburg. He had spent 2 decades teaching students about production capacity, resource management, and the mathematics of modern warfare. He had waited patiently for the right moment to reveal what he and Klaus had learned in that Belgian depot. The moment came when a young historian researching German logistics contacted both men independently. She had found references to their prisoner of war work in American archives and wanted to interview them about their experiences. Her name was Dr. Marguerite Schneider, and she was part of a new generation of German scholars determined to understand their country's past without illusion or excuse. Klaus invited her to his home in Munich, and for the first time in 20 years, removed his notebooks from the locked drawer where they had remained hidden. "I want you to understand something," he told her. "These numbers are not about shame or blame. They are about truth, about what actually happened and why." Dr. Schneider spent 3 days studying the documentation, cross-referencing it with the American production statistics Chen had provided. Her face reflected the same shock Klaus had experienced 2 decades earlier. "This is extraordinary," she said quietly. "This proves that Germany's defeat was not a matter of betrayal or insufficient will. It was predetermined by economic reality." "Exactly," Klaus replied. "That is what Germany needs to understand. We did not lose because we were weak or because we were betrayed. We lost because we started a war against enemies who collectively outproduced us by ratios that made victory mathematically impossible. Understanding this is essential to ensuring we never make such catastrophic miscalculations again." Werner's documentation, equally meticulous, corroborated everything Klaus had recorded. Together, their work became the foundation for a landmark study of German wartime economics that transformed how historians understood the conflict. The book they helped create, published in 1968, was titled The Mathematics of Defeat, Economic Reality, and German Illusions, 1939 to 1945. The work was controversial. Some Germans criticized it as unpatriotic, as dishonoring the sacrifice of those who had fought. But many more, particularly younger Germans, embraced it as necessary truth. It became required reading in universities, used to teach new generations about the dangers of nationalism divorced from reality, of ideology that refuses to acknowledge mathematical fact. Klaus gave his final interview about the documentation in 1982, shortly before his death. The interviewer asked if he had any regrets about waiting so long to reveal what he knew. Klaus thought carefully before answering. "I regret that I could not warn them in time," he said. "But I do not regret preserving the truth for when Germany was ready to hear it."